Well, good morning to you, church. Thank you all so much for being here. We have spent the first few weeks of the year looking at the health of our souls. We wanted to take Jesus' yoke upon us and find rest for our souls in Him. And I think that's important to start a year off. Really, any age that you're at, you should always work on being healthier. And I was at the doctor's office a month or so ago just for some routine stuff, and the nurse there took my blood pressure. And she got done and she read that thing, and I don't know how to read the numbers, but she looked at that thing. I said, "How does it look?" And she said, "You've got great blood pressure numbers." And I was about to say thank you. And then she added something to her statement that I didn't appreciate. She said, "You've got great blood pressure numbers for someone your age." And I've noticed that being tacked on to compliments lately, and I don't appreciate it. You hit a golf ball well for someone your age. You had a really good time in that 5K for someone your age. And when is that going to go away? And I realize it ain't gonna. No, it's not. But no matter what age you're at, you should never stop trying to get more fit. And you never reach a stage in life where you don't need to exercise your faith. Now, faith is easy when life is going smooth, but easy faith will let you down when life takes you down, and life will. But isn't it true that the people that have made the greatest impact on our lives are often the people that have not had an easy life? The people who've had the greatest impact on your life are people that have had to exercise hard faith. I mean the kind of faith that is hard to come by, and the kind of faith that will sustain you when hard times come by. So I thought that after a time of caring for our souls, we ought to turn our attention to our faith. And so, Lord willing, for the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at the Old Testament book of Habakkuk. Now, the first thing you need to do when you study the book of Habakkuk is find the book of Habakkuk. And I'm here to help. It is between Nahum and Zephaniah. So that should be easy enough. You'll find that easy. But Habakkuk is in the Old Testament. Habakkuk is considered one of the minor prophets of the Old Testament. And that's not because what he has to say is less important. It's just because his book is short. It's only 3 chapters, and I would encourage you to read the book of Habakkuk each week that we're in this study. But one thing you'll notice is that Habakkuk isn't like any of the other prophetic books for one reason. Habakkuk never addresses the people. All of the other prophetic books talk to the people. There might be a prophet to Israel. There might be a prophet to Judah. There's even a prophet to Nineveh. There's prophets to pagan nations. But Habakkuk doesn't talk to the people of God because Habakkuk's biggest problem is not with the people. It's with God. It's with God's inaction regarding the way people are acting. Because Habakkuk cannot understand why God tolerates so much injustice in the nation that Habakkuk loves so much. So listen to the very first few verses of chapter 1 of Habakkuk, starting in verse 2. "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted." Now let me set the context there for this letter. In Habakkuk's history, God has rescued the people out of Egypt. He has brought them out of Egyptian bondage into the land of Canaan. And the Hebrews there in the land of Canaan were 12 tribes from the 12 sons of Jacob. But they were 12 tribes, but they were one nation under God. Now, centuries after that, a king died, a king named Solomon. And after Solomon died, the nation split into 2 separate nations. The 10 northern tribes took on the name Israel. The two southern tribes took on the name Judah. Both nations went into a spiritual decline. There was apostasy, there was idolatry, there was injustice, and those took hold of both nations. Now, the northern tribes, the northern nation, their descent was more rapid. They were taken into captivity by a nation called Assyria, and they ceased to exist. They would never come back to the land. They just end. Now, Habakkuk was born after that. He is a prophet to the southern kingdom, and he is seeing them do the same things that ruined the northern kingdom. Everywhere he turns, he sees injustice, he sees cruelty, he sees evil. And Habakkuk's faith is struggling. That's nothing new. The existence of so much evil in the world has been a challenge to faith for thousands of years. You probably know somebody for whom faith in God is a challenge. And the reason for that is because of all of the evil that is in the world. They might say the reason I don't believe in God is because there's too much evil in the world. But here's the irony. I think the evil in the world is one of the reasons why I believe in God. Because evil only is a problem if God exists. Because if God doesn't exist, why do you have a problem with the existence of evil? Richard Dawkins is a well-known atheist and author. He's wrote several books, most of which are silly. He's wrote two that are actually quite good. He wrote a book called A River Out of Egypt, A Darwinian View of Life. And in that book, he says this, I quote, "In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. Nature is not cruel, only piteously indifferent. This is one of the hardest lessons for humans to learn. We cannot admit that things might be neither good nor evil, neither cruel nor kind, but simply callous, indifferent to all suffering, lacking all purpose." End quote. Now, I don't agree with him, but I do appreciate his intellectual honesty. Because if there is no benevolent God, if everything is just, this universe is nothing but mechanistic. He says it's just genetic replication happening over and over and over again. And if we are just cosmic accidents, then we should expect life to be cruel and to be random and to be unfair. But that's not Habakkuk. He is sure of the existence of God. He's also sure of the character of God. But that's where his faith is struggling. Look at chapter 1, verse 12. Habakkuk says this, "Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why, then, do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves?" Listen to what Habakkuk is saying. God, you are holy. God, you are good. God, you are powerful. God, you are the rock. So what do you do when you believe in the rock, but find yourself in a hard place? We need a faith, a hard faith, that will sustain us when we are between the rock and a hard place. We need a faith that is hard to come by. We need a faith that will stand up when hard times come by. We need a faith that will hold us up when life takes us down. And this is what God says in response to Habakkuk. And I think it's one of the most important verses in all the Bible. It's one of the verses that's quoted more often in the New Testament. And if you've read Paul, you recognize this verse. It's Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, where God tells Habakkuk, "The righteous shall live by faith." That same verse in the Message reads like this: "But the person in right standing before God, through loyal and steady believing, is fully alive, really alive." To be really alive, you need loyal and steady believing. You need faith, a faith that has been exercised. That's the kind of faith that we're going to talk about, Lord willing, for the next 3 weeks. The kind of faith that holds on to the rock when life gets rocky. Next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about how long faith. You know what I mean by how long faith? It's the faith that you know God's going to give you an answer, but it has been a long time since you've asked a question and you've not heard a word in response. How long faith? And then the week after that, Lord willing, we're going to talk about even though faith. Am I going to find strength in God even though I don't get the answer that I want? But today we're going to talk about the hardest faith of all, and it's the why. Why faith? Why are things like they are if God is who he is? Because why faith lives between how things are and who God is. Habakkuk had a lot of whys. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Because Habakkuk could not reconcile the deity that he believed was on the throne with the reality that he saw on the street. And the thing is this: your why is ultimately going to be based and answered by your who. You question God on the basis of what kind of rock you think he is. And I want to illustrate this with a lot of different examples, because people answer that why by the different ways they think about who God is. One way somebody thought about God, several decades ago, there was a best-selling book that was published it was called "Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People?" And it was written by a rabbi named Harold Kushner. And he did not write abstractly. He wrote from a hard place. His son was born with a genetic disease that not only led to his son's death, led to his son's painful death. And Rabbi Kushner tried to resolve the why with the who, and he concluded that God may be good, but God can't do everything. You've heard the statement that God is great, God is good. Well, Rabbi Kushner decided that God was good, but he was not great. Because if he was great, he would have healed my son. Some people go to the other extreme. They will say our gods are great, but they're not good. And that's why life is so hard. You're going to resolve your why on the basis of who it is that you call the rock. So Habakkuk would never have asked why if he was a polytheist. If he believed that there was a bunch of gods out there, then, well, maybe those gods are stronger than my God right now, and that's why. Habakkuk didn't do that. Habakkuk also wasn't a deist. He wasn't somebody that said, well, there's a God out there, and that God created everything, which includes you and me, but that God doesn't care. He doesn't care. He's distant, and he doesn't get involved with your life. Habakkuk also wasn't Richard Dawkins. He wasn't somebody who was, even though they were intellectually honest, they said, you know what, there is no God. We're just all cogs in a machine, and it's not supposed to be fair, and that's why. There's a lot of different ways that you could answer the question why, but it's all based on your who. Habakkuk said, when he asked who is God, Habakkuk would have said God is one. There's just one God, and God is good, and God is holy, and God cannot do anything evil, and God is sovereign, God is all-powerful, God is on the throne. And you know what? You probably have believed the exact same thing that Habakkuk did. And if you do, you're going to have to exercise some why faith. Why are things the way that they are, God, if you are who I think you are? You're going to have to wrestle with what you understand about God and what you just don't understand at all. Why? Now, I have always argued that why is overrated. Because sometimes if you do understand, it doesn't mean that the wrestling is over. It doesn't mean that the situation is over. Sometimes when God tells us why, we don't like the answer that we get. God gives Habakkuk the answer why. Habakkuk says, God, why are you letting so much evil go on in the kingdom of Judah? And here's God's answer back to him in chapter 1, verse 5. He says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. God tells Habakkuk, I do see the injustice in Judah. I see the injustice in all the world. I see the injustice, and I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, and they are going to come and judge the nation and take it captive. Habakkuk didn't have that one on his bingo card. And I think sometimes we want to hear from God right up until the moment where we hear what we didn't want to hear. Habakkuk didn't want to hear that, because Habakkuk's next question back to God is, how is that fair? We quoted it earlier. Let's read it again. Chapter 1, starting in verse 12. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? Habakkuk went from thinking that God wasn't doing enough to thinking that God's going to fix this problem the wrong way. And by asking the question like that, Habakkuk reveals that his big problem is that God is not meeting his expectations. And hard places in life often expose hard truths about our faith. And that's going to be the theme, Lord willing, for the next 3 weeks. Could it be that sometimes that we believe in God? If he exists, he does it to give me the life that I want. If he exists, he does it to make my life easier. That kind of soft faith is not going to sustain you when hard times come by. That kind of faith will shatter. We need a faith that is going to hold on to God no matter what happens. And that is a faith that is hard to come by. There was a theologian, actually he's still living, a theologian named William Willimon, and he tells this story of when he was a very young pastor, that there was a couple at his church who were expecting their third child. And this couple was called to the hospital to speak with their obstetrician, and the obstetrician said that they have found 2 problems with the baby. The baby, if it's going to be born, is going to be born with Down's syndrome. That was problem number 1. But a more immediate problem was the baby had a respiratory disease that could only be corrected with surgery, and they had to move quick. If this surgery wasn't performed in the next 72 hours, the baby was going to die. And the doctor's advice was to let nature take its course. The doctor said that if the respiratory disease were to take the life of the baby, then the problem would be eliminated. And the couple said, what do you mean by problem? And the doctor said, well, raising a special needs child, it's going to be hard on your marriage. It's going to be hard on your other children. Why would you want to go through that kind of suffering? And the mother said, well, it's true that we have had a life that has been free of much suffering. But suffering could also be a great blessing to our family. It could teach us to love better. It could teach us to serve more. It could teach us to be more selfless. It could teach us to rely more on God's strength. The doctor was exasperated and turned to William Willimon and said, would you reason with them? Would you talk some sense into them? And William Willimon said, they are using reason. It's just a different kind of reason. Because the doctor was reasoning from his worldview, because his dominant worldview was like the worldview of most of the world. We're just cosmic accidents. We're not even supposed to be here. Just avoid all the pain and the inconvenience that you can. And if you've got a problem in front of you, get rid of the problem. And if that's your worldview, that makes perfect sense. But their worldview was different, because they believed that God works in suffering and that suffering can be redeemed. Suffering can bring us strength and bring God glory. They believed that one day God would come to end all suffering. They were using perfect sense according to their worldview. They did perform the surgery. Their son was born, and they took him home with great joy because they exercised hard faith. And I've learned something about people who have a faith that can't be shaken. It's often because they've lived through a time where their faith was shaken. And so very quickly, as we're done, let me challenge you to exercise why faith. There's 3 blanks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blanks on your outline. 3 questions, though, or 3 statements. Number 1, 3 things about why faith. Why faith is a faith that can be burdened. Why faith is a faith that can be burdened. It's right to be burdened by wrong. Because the only way that you can survive through life with an easy faith is just to ignore what's going on in the world. Just somehow block out the suffering in the world. Tony Campolo tells a story of how he was visiting a third world country and he went into a restaurant to eat and they sat him down to eat at a table that was at a window where he could see outside. Now, this particular city had a large homeless population and a lot of them were kids. And Tony Campolo got his food and he had his food right here and he could notice that outside his window, not like pressed up against the window, but close enough, there were kids looking in the window, trying to look at food that they only wish they could eat. He lost his appetite, and the owner saw what was happening and came over and grabbed the blinds and pulled them down and said to Tony, "Now you can eat, sir." And Tony thought that is exactly what the world tries to do when they see suffering in the world, is they just pull the blinds down. But hard faith is going to challenge you. Hard faith is going to challenge you to do what Habakkuk did, which is cry out to God. Because it's better to cry out why than to never cry out at all. It's better to have a hard faith than to grow a hard heart. Why faith is a faith that can be burdened. And then second, why faith is a faith that runs to God, not away from God. That's a 2-for-1 special in question number 2 on your outline. Why faith is a faith that runs to God, not away from God. Hard faith presses in instead of pulling away. Because when Habakkuk had a problem with God, he had no problem taking it to God. He says in chapter 2, verse 1, "I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint." Habakkuk fully expected to have a conversation with God, and God welcomes those conversations. He's not afraid of them. And by taking his question to God, Habakkuk was exercising his faith. He was saying, "I would rather wrestle with you, God, than to do life without you." Now, I don't know what God's going to say, but when you don't know what's God going to say, press in to what you already know about God. When my mother got sick, I had only been preaching for a couple of years, and I didn't really know, I really still don't know what I should have talked to God about. I really don't know what I should have asked for. But the best thing that I really could ask God was, is it your will to heal? Is it your will to heal her or to take her? And the best answer I got from God is that my will is for her to know me. And I said, "But Lord, she already knows you." And the answer I got back was, "Then my will is done, no matter what I decide to do." And if that's sufficient for me, Justin, would you let that be sufficient for you as well? See, why faith helps us view the mystery of God through the character of God. That's the last 2 blanks on your outline. Why faith helps us view the mystery of God through the character of God. And that's the most important thing to know about why faith. There'll always be some mystery about faith. We wouldn't need faith if there was no mystery and we knew it all. Think about it. It makes total sense to me that God will not always make total sense to me. I need a God whose thoughts are above my thoughts. I need a God who is beyond me. It makes total sense to me. And so in those hard places where I'm thinking, why, I've learned to step back and rest in who. A few weeks ago when the snow came for a few days, we were in our homes for a few days, and then, the snow had really turned to ice because, everything out there's a little bit of snow on top, but not much further in that there's ice everywhere. And I tried to walk out to the yard or to walk out to the driveway and start Annie's car. It had been out there covered with snow for a few days. I thought I'll go out there and I'll crank that car and let the battery warm up, let everything turn over and all that. I got about 3 steps before I realized I need to be real careful where I put my weight. Because I could put my weight on something that's real slippery and it could get real bad for me real quick. I started to look for the places that didn't have any ice, the places that didn't have any snow. I started looking for a place that I could fully put my weight on. Your faith is the same way. There's going to be slippery places in life. You could put all your weight on something that Richard Dawkins says, I would advise you not to do that. You could have your faith where that rabbi put his feet. I would advise you not to do that either. You look for the rock. You look for the one that Habakkuk said, you can't die. You're on your throne. You are forever and ever. I don't view God through the lens of chaos. I view chaos through the lens of the character of God. Because why faith remembers the cross? Why faith remembers that Jesus hung between the rock and the hard place? And the only reason that explains that is that God loves us that much. So we're going to stand and we're going to sing. And if faith for you has been a struggle lately, I'm so glad that you're here. If faith has been a struggle for you lately, I so hope that you'll be here for the next 2 weeks because, Lord willing, as we have cared for our souls in 2024, I want us to spend a few weeks caring for our faith. And sometimes that does mean exercising, and I like to exercise about as much as y'all do, I would imagine. Sometimes it's not going to be fun. Sometimes it's not going to be enjoyable. Sometimes we're going to have to ask hard questions. But what I want us to do is I want us to put our feet down. I want us to rest our weight on the solid ground that is Jesus Christ. And if there's anything we can do for you today, whether it's to put faith in Christ or if you need the prayers of the church, we just ask that whatever you need is that you'd make it known by coming forward while we stand and while we sing.